March 10, 1945, Fort Kearny, Rhode Island. The northeastern winter is closer to what I remember from Germany, biting cold and snowdrifts that pile against barracks walls. The Atlantic pounds the nearby shore, its constant roar a reminder of the ocean that separates me from home. 2 months have passed since my transfer from Camp Shelby, and while the physical conditions here are harsher, my status has changed dramatically. I am now officially part of the faculty at the POW Education Initiative, teaching German history and literature to fellow prisoners selected for potential leadership roles in post-war Germany. The program is remarkably ambitious. American educators from Harvard, Yale, and Princeton have designed a curriculum covering democratic theory, constitutional government, federalism, and civil liberties. German prisoners with academic backgrounds like myself provide cultural context and translation assistance. Our students, Wehrmacht officers and NCOs, screened for intelligence and openness to new ideas, attend classes 6 hours daily. They debate Madison's Federalist Papers with the same intensity once reserved for military planning sessions. The Americans call this denazification, but it's more complex than simple indoctrination. The best professors encourage critical thinking, rather than merely substituting one dogma for another. What strikes me most is the American willingness to acknowledge their own nation's failures. Professor Simmons from Columbia spends an entire session on American slavery and segregation, analyzing the gap between democratic ideals and historical reality. A democracy must constantly strive to live up to its principles, he tells us. The work is never finished. This honest self-criticism, unthinkable in the Third Reich, earns respect even from the most skeptical prisoners. Last week I received a letter from Miller, my guard friend from Camp Shelby. He's been deployed to Germany with the Third Army and writes from the Rhineland, "You wouldn't believe what's left of your cities, Hoffman, just rubble for miles. But the strangest thing, we handed out chocolate bars to some German kids, and one little boy asked me if I knew you. Said his uncle was at Camp Shelby and wrote about the American who shared Coca-Cola with prisoners. Small world, huh?" The image of German children accepting chocolate from American soldiers, exactly as I once imagined in my Mississippi dreams, brings tears I don't try to hide. News of the war's final phase reaches us daily. The Russians have reached the Oder, 60 kilometers from Berlin. American and British forces have crossed the Rhine at Remagen, using a bridge German engineers failed to destroy. The reports of civilian casualties mount as cities I knew and loved, Dresden, Würzburg, Darmstadt, disappear under waves of Allied bombers. I mourn these losses yet cannot summon rage against those who caused them. The destruction feels like the inevitable conclusion to a tragedy whose first act began long before bombs fell, perhaps in 1933, or in the bitter aftermath of Versailles, or even in the nationalist mythologies that preceded both world wars. Among my students, reactions vary dramatically. Some maintain that Germany fights on for honor alone, a lost cause but a noble one. Others have embraced defeat as necessary liberation, the painful surgery required to excise the Nazi cancer. The most thoughtful recognize that Germany's future lies neither in denying the past nor being forever defined by it. As Major Kleinmann, a former mathematics professor from Heidelberg, observed during a discussion on collective guilt, "We must acknowledge everything without accepting that it is all we are or can be." In our barracks at night, conversations increasingly turn to practical questions. Will there be trials for war criminals? How will Germany be governed? Will it remain a single nation or be carved into occupation zones? What of the territories in the east? The Soviet advance brings special dread. Revenge for German atrocities on the Eastern Front seems inevitable. I have no answers but encourage these discussions. Better to face uncertainty with open eyes than cling to comfortable delusions. 2 days ago, Colonel Harrison, the program director, called me to his office. Unlike Hayes's warm paternalism, Harrison is coolly professional, a former prosecutor with wire-rimmed glasses and precise diction. "Hoffman," he began without preamble, "we're assembling a team of German POWs to assist with civil administration after surrender. Your evaluations suggest you'd be valuable in educational reconstruction. Would you be willing to return to Germany in an advisory capacity under American military government?" The question momentarily robbed me of speech. Return to Germany, not as a defeated soldier but as part of the victor's reconstruction effort, The implications are enormous. To many, it would represent collaboration, even treason. Yet the opportunity to help shape a new educational system purged of Nazi ideology, to reintroduce the humanistic traditions that first drew me to teaching. I would need to know more details, I finally answered. But yes, I would consider it. Harrison nodded, as if my answer was expected. There's something else you should see. He handed me a thin file. Inside was a report from the International Red Cross confirming what I had long feared but refused to accept. My father died in Dachau in 1944, listed as a political prisoner. My mother's fate remains unknown. Her last known location, Dresden, in February 1945, just before the firestorm that consumed the city. I felt nothing at first, as if the words on the page described strangers. Then grief crashed through the numbness, raw and overwhelming. Harrison waited silently until I could speak. My father opposed them from the beginning, I said finally. He saw what was coming when I could not, or would not. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. He was right and I was wrong, and I never told him. Perhaps, Harrison said quietly, your work now can honor his memory. He offered no platitudes about time healing all wounds or my parents being in a better place. His restraint felt like respect. Back in my quarters, I removed the bottle cap from my pocket, my talisman these 16 months, and really looked at it. The red and white Coca-Cola logo, the crimped metal edges worn smooth from constant handling. Such a trivial object to mark the turning point in one man's understanding of the world. I thought of my father in his final days at Dachau, wondering perhaps if his warnings to me had made any difference. I thought of Miller sharing chocolate with German children while their city lay in ruins around them. I thought of Weber, still in Mississippi, possibly still believing in final victory even as Berlin crumbles. The Americans have a saying, history is written by the victors, but I wonder if it isn't actually written by the survivors, those who live to tell what happened and, more importantly, what it meant. If I survive this war, if I return to a Germany unrecognizable from the one I left, what story will I tell? That we were all victims of a madman's delusion? That would be too convenient, absolving too many of responsibility, myself included. That we were uniquely evil, a nation of monsters. That denies our humanity and the uncomfortable truth that what happened in Germany could happen anywhere conditions are right. Perhaps instead I will tell the story of a Coca-Cola bottle passed through a fence, a small moment of human connection that revealed a world beyond ideology. I'll explain how doubt can be sweeter than certainty, how freedom includes the right to question one's own beliefs, how democracy's messiness and inefficiency are features rather than flaws. I'll describe America not as paradise, it is too flawed for that, but as a nation that aspires to ideals it often fails to reach yet refuses to abandon. And I'll suggest that Germany in its own way might do the same. Tonight, as air raid sirens wail in distant Berlin and Hamburg, I pack my few possessions for whatever comes next. The Goethe collection from Elizabeth Miller, letters from home that stopped arriving months ago, the metal bottle cap that changed everything, artifacts of a life interrupted and transformed by war. Outside my window, American soldiers play baseball in the spring twilight, their shouts and laughter carrying on the wind. Tomorrow they might ship out to fight the remaining battles of this long war. Some will die on German soil, never seeing their homes again. Yet tonight they play beneath New England stars as if peace were already here. Their ability to fully inhabit the present moment, to work when work is needed and play when play is possible, seems another kind of freedom I never understood before. I seal this diary with a final thought. Perhaps the most American thing about America isn't Coca-Cola or Hollywood, or even its staggering industrial output. Perhaps it's the capacity for reinvention, the belief that neither nations nor individuals are permanently defined by their pasts. If Germany is to rise from its self-created apocalypse, it will need to embrace this same possibility of transformation, not to forget or deny, but to become something new while acknowledging everything that came before. The bottle cap goes into my pocket one last time. Tomorrow it becomes a souvenir, a reminder of who I was and am no longer. Tomorrow we begin again. January 15th, 1945. Winter in Mississippi bears little resemblance to the bitter cold I remember from the Eastern Front. The rain falls in sheets rather than snow, turning the campgrounds to mud that clings to our boots like memories of another life. It has been 14 months since my capture, and the world I once knew exists now only in fading photographs and increasingly rare letters from home. Christmas passed with muted observation. Colonel Hayes permitted a small tree in each barracks, and the Red Cross distributed packages containing chocolate, cigarettes, and warm socks. The camp choir, a surprisingly professional ensemble of former opera singers and church musicians, performed Bach's Christmas oratorio. The music transported us briefly beyond barbed wire, its mathematical precision and spiritual yearning, the perfect expression of the German soul at its finest. Even some American guards stood listening, their faces softened by recognition of beauty that transcends enmity. News from the homeland grows increasingly grim. The Ardennes offensive, what the Americans call the Battle of the Bulge, has failed. Hitler's last gamble to split the Allied forces collapsed under the weight of American industrial might. Stories circulate of Wehrmacht units retreating without fuel, of tanks abandoned when they ran dry. Meanwhile, American supply columns stretch to the horizon, their trucks and jeeps seeming as numberless as stars. In our barracks, the hierarchy has shifted dramatically. Weber and his circle of true believers have grown smaller and quieter. Their corner, once the power center where Hitler's portrait was secretly displayed on his birthday, now feels like an island of delusion amid a sea of grim acceptance. Yesterday I overheard Weber arguing desperately with Müller, once his loyal disciple. The Führer has planned for this. It draws the enemy deep into our territory where secret weapons will destroy them. Müller simply walked away, leaving Weber shouting to empty air. The camp newspaper I edit, New Perspectives, has grown from a 4-page bulletin to a 16-page weekly. We cover camp events, share excerpts from American newspapers, carefully selected by our censors, publish poetry and short stories written by prisoners, and include German recipes adapted for American ingredients. The most popular feature is After the War, essays by prisoners imagining what life might be like in post-war Germany. The diversity of visions, from conservative monarchists dreaming of Hohenzollern restoration to democratic socialists planning worker cooperatives, reveals how completely the monolithic Nazi worldview has fractured among us. I write this entry after returning from a most unusual evening. Colonel Hayes invited several prisoner representatives to his home on the campgrounds for dinner. Myself, Dr. Kramer, Chaplain Bauer, and surprisingly, Feldwebel Schmidt, a former trade unionist from Hamburg, imprisoned before the war for social democratic activities before being conscripted and sent to Africa. Hayes's wife prepared a traditional American meal: roast turkey, sweet potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. Wine was served, the first alcohol many of us had tasted in years. The conversation remained carefully apolitical, focusing on music, literature, and life before the war. Mrs. Hayes, a former schoolteacher, spoke passable German and asked intelligent questions about Goethe and Schiller. Their daughter, a university student home on break, played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on the piano, not perfectly, but with genuine feeling. For a few hours we experienced the normalcy of civilized exchange that war had stolen from us. As we were leaving, Hayes took me aside. "Hoffman, there's something you should know. The International Red Cross has requested teachers for a POW education program. Your name has been put forward. It would mean transfer to Fort Kearny in Rhode Island. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to help shape how German prisoners might be prepared for post-war life. Yet I felt unexpected reluctance to leave Camp Shelby, which has become a kind of home, with relationships and responsibilities I've come to value. May I consider it?" I asked. Hayes nodded. "Take your time, but not too much. The war won't last forever, and there's work to be done preparing for what comes after." His words lingered as I walked back through the guarded gate to my barracks. The war won't last forever, a simple truth that changes everything about how one lives within it. In my footlocker, carefully preserved between pages of Goethe, I keep 2 photographs. One shows me in uniform beside my father at my commissioning, his face proud yet troubled, mine beaming with naive certainty. The other arrived 3 months ago after a year's delay, my childhood home in Frankfurt, reduced to a blackened shell after Allied bombing, my mother standing amid the ruins, her face a mask of dignified suffering. I look at them together each night. Before and after cause and effect the wages of collective madness. Tonight, I add a third item to this private shrine, a newspaper clipping Hayes gave me showing the Nuremberg rally grounds. Those massive stone platforms where we once celebrated the 1,000-year Reich, now being used as a vehicle maintenance depot by American forces. Jeeps parked in neat rows where thousands once saluted in unison, the perfect symbol of monumental hubris reduced to practical utility. The America I discovered daily is not the decadent plutocracy we were taught to despise, but something more pragmatic, a nation that values function over form, results over rhetoric, innovation over tradition. Their armies advance not through fanatical courage, but through logistical brilliance, the unglamorous victory of supply chains over battle cries. I've begun to understand that what we called German idealism contained the seeds of our destruction, the romantic notion that will and spirit could triumph over material reality. We loved the image of the lone German soldier, outgunned but never outfought, holding off the materialistic hordes through sheer determination. What dangerous nonsense. I've watched American engineers construct a new barracks in 3 days, laying concrete foundations and electrical wiring with casual efficiency. The same men argue politics over dinner, criticize their generals in the open, and share their Hershey bars with German prisoners. Their system allows for both material abundance and individual freedom, the combination we were told was impossible. As I write these final lines tonight, a radio in the guards' quarters plays Glenn Miller. The smooth, sophisticated jazz, another art form prohibited as degenerate in the Reich, drifts across the compound. Several prisoners stand near the fence listening silently, perhaps wondering as I do what else we were forbidden that might have enriched rather than corrupted us. The sweet melody of Moonlight Serenade mingles with the taste memory of Coca-Cola, creating a sensory blueprint for a different kind of future, one where pleasure isn't suspect and beauty needs no ideological justification. Tomorrow I will accept Hayes's offer. The war may be ending, but the work of rebuilding, not just cities but minds, has only begun. My journey from Africa Corps officer to Mississippi prisoner to Rhode Island teacher marks a transformation as profound as Germany's own coming metamorphosis. The bottle cap remains in my pocket, a small token of the moment when one world ended and another became possible. November 7th, 1943, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The journey across the Atlantic felt like crossing into another world entirely. 3 weeks ago, I was Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffmann of the 21st Panzer Division, defending the fatherland in North Africa. Now I am simply prisoner Jabra 4721, one of thousands captured when Rommel's grand desert campaign collapsed like a house of sand. The Americans who guard us seem impossibly young, their uniforms crisp as if they've never known the bite of desert grit or the stench of burning fuel. They move with the casual confidence of men who have never known hunger. The camp sprawls like a small town, neat rows of barracks behind double fences topped with barbed wire that glints in the southern sun. There are over 3,000 of us here already, mostly Africa Corps, with more arriving each week. The Americans have been correct, not friendly, but not cruel. The Geneva Convention is followed to the letter. This surprises many of my comrades who expected brutal treatment after years of Goebbels' warnings about American savagery. I record these observations in this small notebook an American sergeant allowed me to keep, after inspecting every page, of course. He even gave me a pencil. "Write home if you want," he said. "We'll send it through the Red Cross," as if I could tell the truth of what I'm beginning to see. The food is the first shock. White bread, fresh daily, meat at every meal, coffee with real sugar. Many of the men gorge themselves sick after the meager rations we survived on during the final months in Africa. Our guards watch with amusement as hardened veterans of Rommel's elite forces marvel at simple plates of eggs and bacon. "You boys act like you never seen food before," one guard laughed this morning. I wanted to tell him that in Berlin last winter, a single egg would cost a week's wages, if you could find one at all. The lie of our inevitable victory begins to unravel at the breakfast table. Today, something extraordinary happened. A young guard named Miller, barely 20, with freckles across his sunburned nose, was walking the perimeter during the hot afternoon hours when most men rest in the shade. He paused near where I sat, sketching the camp layout in my notebook. Instead of reprimanding me, he leaned against the fence and asked about my drawing. We spoke cautiously at first, him in broken German, me in the English I learned at university before the war. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 green glass bottles, dripping with condensation. "Coca-Cola," he said, pushing one through the fence. Best damn thing on a hot day. I had heard of this American drink, of course. It had been available in Germany before the war, though expensive and considered decadently foreign. I'd never tasted it. The bottle was cold and heavy in my hand, the glass worn smooth like river stones. The cap made a satisfying sound when Miller showed me how to open it against the edge of a bench. And then that first sip, sweet, yes, but with a sharp bite and strange spices I couldn't identify. Bubbles that tickled my nose and made my eyes water. It was like nothing produced in Germany. Good, ain't it? Miller grinned, and in that moment, he wasn't an enemy guard, but just a young man sharing a cold drink on a hot day. I nodded, unable to explain how this simple act of kindness had momentarily pierced the armor of my certainty. We had been told Americans were crude, uncultured barbarians, their products gaudy imitations of superior German engineering. Yet here was this drink in its perfectly shaped bottle, instantly recognizable around the world. A small thing, perhaps. Our trivial luxury, but also a symbol of something our propaganda never mentioned, the effortless abundance of America. Miller drank Coca-Cola as casually as water, while in Berlin even the highest party officials scrambled for coffee substitutes and synthetic flavorings. The other prisoners saw our exchange. Tonight in the barracks, some called me a traitor for speaking with the enemy, for accepting his offering. Hauptmann Weber, a dedicated party member who keeps a small portrait of the Führer hidden in his boot, spat at my feet. They're softening you up, Hoffmann. First Coca-Cola, then treason. Perhaps he's right to worry. Not about treason, my oath as an officer still means something to me, but about questions that now bubble up like the carbonation in that bottle, questions I dare only ask in these private pages. I fall asleep wondering how a nation that can produce such abundance, that can afford to give Coca-Cola to its common soldiers and even share it with enemies, could ever be defeated by a Germany where civilians line up for hours for a loaf of coarse bread. The taste of caramel and strange spices lingers on my tongue. A small revolution. December 24th, 1943. Christmas Eve in captivity. The camp commander, Colonel Hayes, has allowed modest decorations in the mess hall, paper chains and pine boughs gathered from the surrounding forest. Some of the men refuse to participate, calling it collaboration, but most welcome any break from routine. A group of prisoners with musical training has been practicing German Christmas carols. They'll perform tonight, and the Americans seem genuinely interested. Small moments of humanity amid the barbed wire. I've been assigned to the camp library, a room with perhaps 300 books, mostly donated by local churches and schools. My task is to catalogue them and assist the other prisoners. It's a position of minor privilege, earned through my English skills and university background. The work keeps my mind occupied and gives me access to American newspapers, censored of military information but otherwise intact. What I read conflicts dramatically with what we were told in Germany. Headlines announce production figures that seem impossible. 100,000 aircraft in 1943 alone, 50,000 tanks, 17 aircraft carriers. Numbers that dwarf our most ambitious manufacturing achievements. At first I dismissed these as propaganda, but conversations with the guards confirm the scale. One young private from Detroit described his father's factory, converted from making automobiles to B-24 bombers, one complete aircraft every hour, around the clock. I think of our prized Messerschmitt factory near Munich, how we celebrated reaching 200 fighters per month. The mathematics of this war suddenly seemed terribly clear, a calculus of inevitable defeat. I record these thoughts here because I cannot speak them aloud. To do so would be to invite accusations of defeatism from men who still believe in final victory. Men like Weber, who insists the real Germany, the secret weapons, the reserve armies, has yet to show its strength. I no longer have his certainty. Tonight something unexpected happened that I must record. After the Christmas carols, as prisoners and guards maintained their awkward truce, a package arrived for me. A Red Cross parcel, but not from home. Inside was a book of Goethe's poems in German, a bar of chocolate, cigarettes, and a note. Thought you might appreciate some civilization amid your captivity. Miller mentioned you were a reader. Merry Christmas. Elizabeth Miller. The guard's sister, I learned later. A university student in New Orleans who reads German literature. I held the book like a holy relic. The familiar verses brought tears I couldn't explain to the suspicious men watching me. Not homesickness exactly, but grief for a Germany I fear no longer exists. the Germany of Goethe and Schiller, of music and philosophy, not of book-burning and blind obedience. Or perhaps it never truly existed, except in the romantic imagination of people like me, who should have known better. Weber saw my tears and nodded knowingly. Ja, Hoffmann, remember what they've taken from us. Use that anger. His misunderstanding was so complete I couldn't respond. How could I explain that what moved me was not hatred for my captors, but the simple human connection of a stranger, sending Goethe across enemy lines? That this small act of cultural recognition seemed more civilized than anything I'd witnessed in the Reich's final years. After lights out, I lay awake listening to the soft breathing of 40 men dreaming of home. I thought of my father, a history professor removed from his position in 1936 for intellectual impurity, his caution when I joined the Hitler Youth, his tight-lipped silence when I was commissioned. "Be careful what you allow yourself to believe, Klaus," he told me the last time I saw him. "The most dangerous lies are the ones that ask nothing of you, except your silent complicity." I didn't understand him then. I'm beginning to now. The taste of American chocolate, rich and smooth, nothing like our wartime ersatz, mingles with the memory of that first Coca-Cola. Small pleasures that reveal an uncomfortable truth. While we Germans have been sacrificing, believing our privations were shared by our enemies, Americans have lived in abundance. The terrible question forms, have we been fighting and dying not for a superior civilization, but merely for a poorer one? March 15, 1944. Spring arrives in Mississippi, bringing waves of thunderstorms that shake our barracks and turn the parade grounds to mud. 4 months in America has changed me in ways I struggle to articulate. My English improves daily through conversations with the guards and immersion in the library's books. Some prisoners view my facility with the enemy's language suspiciously. Others seek me out as interpreter when they need medical attention or wish to make requests to the camp authorities. The Americans have begun a re-education program, films and lectures about American democracy and history. Many prisoners boycott these sessions, seeing them as propaganda. Perhaps they are, but I attend curious. Last week they showed newsreels claiming to depict concentration camps, horrific images of skeletal prisoners, mass graves, cremation ovens. Most German prisoners walked out shouting Lügenpresse, lying press, the same dismissal we used in Germany against any inconvenient truth. I stayed, forcing myself to watch. A young Jewish lieutenant named Steinberg operated the projector. After the other prisoners left, he approached me. "Do you believe it?" he asked quietly. I couldn't answer immediately. "These camps," I finally said, "if they exist as shown—" He cut me off. "My grandparents lived near Krakow. We haven't heard from them since 1941. His eyes held mine, not with hatred, but with a terrible question I couldn't answer. Later, alone in the library, I found myself scanning American newspapers from 1933 onward, tracing the years I lived through from the outside perspective. Reports of early persecutions of Jews that we were told were foreign exaggerations. Warnings about German rearmament that we celebrated as secret triumphs. The gradual recognition that everything we dismissed as enemy propaganda contained seeds of truth. I think of rumors I heard on the Eastern Front, from soldiers rotating back. Whispered stories of SS Einsatzgruppen behind the lines, of villages emptied of Jews. Stories I chose not to investigate further. Today, Miller brought another Coca-Cola during his break. We've developed a strange friendship across the fence. He asks about my life before the war, and I find myself telling him about teaching literature at a gymnasium in Frankfurt, about my fiancée Elsa, who stopped writing after the Allied bombing began in earnest. He tells me about his family's farm in Tennessee, his plans to study agriculture after the war, his girlfriend who writes him weekly letters scented with perfume. "Why do you bring me these?" I asked, holding up the bottle that has become our ritual. He shrugged. "My daddy fought in the last war, said the German soldiers weren't bad men, just on the wrong side of things, said they were just like us, except for the bad luck of having worse leaders. I wanted to be offended, to defend Germany's honor, but found the words stuck in my throat. What if he's right? What if the greatest tragedy of my generation is not that we fought and lost, but that we fought at all for something that never deserved our sacrifice? In the evening, as sunset paints the Mississippi sky in colors that remind me of the Rhine Valley, a small group gathers in our barracks, former soldiers from across Germany, a Bavarian baker, a Dresden machinist, a Hamburg dock worker, a Berlin University student. We speak quietly about what we've seen here, about the uncomfortable questions that arise, about what awaits Germany when defeat comes, as it surely must. Not all agree with my assessments. Some still believe, but the questions themselves no longer feel like treason, merely like the necessary reckoning that survivors must eventually face. In my dreams, I still wear my officer's uniform proudly. But I wake to the reality of prisoner's garb and the growing certainty that I've served a cause built on foundations of sand. The Coca-Cola sits on my small shelf beside Goethe. Artifacts of a world beyond the one I was taught to believe in. Small totems of doubt. July 4th, 1944. Independence Day in America. The camp has been busy with preparations for this national celebration. We prisoners watch with curiosity as the guards decorate the administration buildings with flags and bunting. They've been in high spirits since news of something called D-Day last month, apparently a massive landing in France. The beginning of the end, though none say this directly to us. Today's celebrations included something extraordinary. The guards organized a baseball game between themselves and willing prisoners. Many refused to participate, seeing it as fraternization with the enemy, but enough volunteered that 2 full teams took the field under the hot summer sun. I played, awkwardly grasping the unfamiliar bat, more interested in the cultural ritual than the sport itself. The guards won, naturally, but moments of genuine camaraderie emerged. Shared laughter when Feldwebel Müller hit the ball backward, applause when young Schneider managed a home run. For a few hours the war seemed distant. Afterward came a feast, grilled meat they call hot dogs, corn on the cob dripping with butter, watermelon so ripe the juice ran down our chins, and Coca-Cola for everyone, no longer a secret exchange but openly distributed. I watched my fellow prisoners, some still reluctant, taste this symbol of America for the first time. Their expressions mirrored my own first experience: surprise, pleasure, and something deeper. Confusion at finding enjoyment in something belonging to the enemy. As darkness fell, fireworks exploded overhead. Brilliant flowers of light and sound that made some men dive for cover. The learned reflex of soldiers who have known too many explosions. But most of us watched in wonder. Beside me, Dr. Kramer, once a physics professor at Heidelberg, spoke softly. "Look at this display. Pure extravagance. Chemicals and gunpowder used not for weapons but for celebration. Even in war they have powder to spare for beauty." His observation struck me deeply. This casual abundance, from food to fireworks, reveals America's industrial might more clearly than any propaganda film. Later, as the celebration wound down, Colonel Hayes himself approached where I stood with a small group of prisoners. He's a reserved man, West Point educated, who rarely interacts with us directly. "I hope you gentlemen enjoyed our little national party," he said, his formal German surprising us. 200 years ago we fought for independence from a government we believed oppressed us. We believe all people deserve such freedom. The political message wasn't subtle, but something in his dignity prevented the usual defensive response. Weber, standing nearby, couldn't resist replying, "We too fight for Germany's freedom, Colonel." Hayes regarded him calmly. "Perhaps, but there's a difference between fighting for freedom and fighting for those who have taken it away." He nodded politely and moved on, leaving us in uncomfortable silence. In my barracks tonight, conversations turn increasingly to the future. News of Allied advances comes regularly now. The guards make no attempt to hide the shifting tide of war. Some men still insist on eventual German victory through secret weapons or strategic genius. Others have begun the painful process of imagining defeat. What will be left of Germany? Kramer wondered aloud. The factories, the cities, all in ruins. A generation of men dead or imprisoned. I think of my home in Frankfurt, of the university where I once thought I would build my career, of Elsa, whose face grows harder to recall with each passing month. What remains when the grand illusions fall away? This is the question that haunts my sleepless nights. In my pocket, I carry a small token, the metal cap from that first Coca-Cola bottle Miller gave me, a trivial souvenir of the moment when doubt first cracked the shell of my certainty. I turn it over in my fingers like a worry stone, its ridged edges worn smooth. The red and white logo, still faintly visible, represents something I'm only beginning to understand. That the America we were taught to despise has built its power not primarily through weapons, but through something more subtle. a system that produces such abundance that even prisoners of war can be treated to ice-cold soft drinks and fireworks displays. We were told we fought for German culture against American materialism. The cruel irony is that here in captivity, I have found more culture, more books, music, and intellectual freedom than existed in Germany's final pre-war years. The American guards discuss politics openly, criticizing their own president with a casualness that would have meant arrest in the Reich. Miller brings me newspapers with cartoons mocking American generals and politicians, unimaginable in a Germany where a joke about the Führer could mean death. Tonight, watching the last fireworks fade over Mississippi, I finally admitted to myself what I've known for months. Germany has lost not just the war but its soul. Whatever comes after, we will need to find it again. I drink my Coca-Cola and wonder if redemption tastes as sweet. October 12th, 1944. Autumn brings cool relief to Mississippi. The trees around Camp Shelby turn brilliant colors that remind me painfully of the German forests in fall. 8 months as a prisoner of war have settled into routine, but beneath the surface, everything has changed. The camp itself has transformed. We are no longer just captives, but a complex society of men coming to terms with imminent defeat. Yesterday, we received news that shook even the most steadfast believers in final victory. The Americans posted photographs of Aachen, the first major German city to fall to Allied forces, the ancient imperial city where Charlemagne was crowned, now in American hands. Seeing German civilians with their hands raised to American GIs made it impossible to maintain the fiction that the war remains on foreign soil. The homeland itself is now the battlefield. I recognized the cathedral square where I once visited on a school trip, now strewn with rubble, the medieval buildings scarred by artillery fire. Weber walked out when the photographs were displayed, but I noticed his hands trembling before he left. The news from Europe arrives daily now. Paris liberated, Romania surrendered, the Red Army crossing into East Prussia. Each headline brings a shift in the camp's atmosphere. Some men retreat further into denial, clustering together to reinforce fading beliefs. Others have begun to look beyond, to prepare for a Germany that will need rebuilding from ashes. We've organized classes in the barracks, English language, American history, democratic principles, not from coercion but from the growing recognition that understanding our captors may be key to understanding our future. The Americans have expanded their re-education program, now officially called the Intellectual Diversion Program. They show films not just of war atrocities that many still refuse to believe, but of normal American life, family dinners, factory work, school classrooms, farming communities. These glimpses into everyday existence affect the men more deeply than any propaganda. The casual prosperity, the ease of interaction, the absence of fear, these reveal the gulf between what we were promised and what others already possessed. I've been appointed to help administer these programs, which puts me in an uncomfortable position with some comrades. Weber no longer speaks to me at all, and others view my cooperation as collaboration. Yet many secretly seek me out, asking questions they wouldn't voice publicly. Is it true Americans allow criticism of their government? Do workers really own automobiles? Could Germans ever live this way? Yesterday, Colonel Hayes called me to his office, a rare summons that caused speculation. The room was simple but comfortable, with a photograph of President Roosevelt on one wall and a map of Europe on another, marked with flags showing Allied advances. He offered me a chair and, surprisingly, a Coca-Cola from a small refrigerator in the corner. "Lieutenant Hoffman," he began, using my former rank out of courtesy, "I'll be direct. We're establishing a new camp newspaper, written by prisoners, for prisoners, with appropriate oversight, of course. I'd like you to serve as editor." I must have looked shocked. "Why me?" I asked. His answer was measured. "Because you've shown the capacity to question your previous beliefs without surrendering your identity. That's a rare quality in times like these." I asked for time to consider, though we both knew I would accept. On my way out, he stopped me with one more question. "That first Coca-Cola, did it really change everything for you, as you once told Miller?" I was embarrassed he knew of my melodramatic statement. "Not the drink itself, Colonel. What it represented. The casual abundance. The fact that your country could spare such luxuries even for enemies." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Coca-Cola follows our troops everywhere. There are bottling plants being set up right behind the front lines in Europe. After we win, it'll be all over Germany too. The matter-of-fact certainty of his statement, not if we win, but after, carried no malice, just the weight of inevitable truth. Perhaps, I replied, Germany could use something sweet after so much bitterness. Walking back to my barracks, I realized how much I've changed. 6 months ago, I would have found his certainty of victory offensive. Now I find myself planning for the world he describes. A defeated Germany awash in Coca-Cola and American influence. Is this treason to my homeland, or the beginning of its salvation? The question has no easy answer. Tonight, our small discussion group gathered again. Larger now, nearly 20 men representing a cross-section of German society in uniform. Former teachers, farmers, factory workers, students. We talked about democratic systems, about federalism, about how Germany might reorganize after Hitler. Some argued passionately for socialism, others for American-style capitalism. The debate grew heated, but remained respectful, itself a minor miracle among men trained in a system that equated disagreement with disloyalty. Dr. Kramer, our physicist, summarized what many felt. We've been conducted like an experiment in a laboratory. First isolated from truth, fed a strict diet of lies, and now gradually exposed to alternative realities. The hypothesis being tested is whether Germans can adapt to freedom after years of its absence. His scientific metaphor prompted uncomfortable laughter, but no one disagreed. Later, alone with my journal, I realized that my first taste of Coca-Cola, that moment of unexpected sweetness and generosity, was indeed a turning point, though not in the way I'd initially thought. It wasn't the drink itself, but the crack it created in a worldview I'd accepted too completely. Through that crack, reality seeped in, impossible to ignore once glimpsed. I think of the Germany that will emerge from this catastrophe, humbled, divided, occupied. The physical rebuilding will be enormous, but the psychological reconstruction may prove even more challenging. How does a nation that believed itself master of Europe adapt to defeat? How do people who surrendered moral autonomy reclaim individual responsibility? Perhaps it begins with small revelations, with Coca-Cola moments that challenge comfortable certainties, with the recognition that what we were taught to despise may contain elements worth embracing, and what we were taught to worship may have led us into darkness. The truth is rarely pure and never simple, as Oscar Wilde wrote in a book I found in our camp library. Another small freedom denied in Hitler's Germany, where Wilde's works were banned. In my dreams now, I walk the streets of a future Frankfurt. American jeeps pass by, children wave at soldiers, and Coca-Cola signs hang from reopened cafes. In this dream, I am neither victor nor vanquished, just a man who has seen both sides of history's divide and hopes to build something worthwhile from the rubble of fallen ideologies. When I wake, I wonder if such reconciliation is possible, or merely the wishful thinking of a prisoner far from home. The metal bottle cap remains in my pocket, a talisman of transformation. From enemy to captive to something harder to define, a German who has glimpsed another possible Germany through the lens of American captivity. Whatever comes next, I cannot unlearn what I have seen. The sweet taste of doubt has become the complex flavor of hope. January 15, 1945. Winter in Mississippi bears little resemblance to the bitter cold I remember from the Eastern Front. The rain falls in sheets rather than snow, turning the campgrounds to mud that clings to our boots like memories of another life. It has been 14 months since my capture, and the world I once knew exists now only in fading photographs and increasingly rare letters from home. Christmas passed with muted observation. Colonel Hayes permitted a small tree in each barracks, and the Red Cross distributed packages containing chocolate, cigarettes, and warm socks. The camp choir, a surprisingly professional ensemble of former opera singers and church musicians, performed Bach's Christmas oratorio. The music transported us briefly beyond barbed wire, its mathematical precision and spiritual yearning, the perfect expression of the German soul at its finest. Even some American guards stood listening, their faces softened by recognition of beauty that transcends enmity. News from the homeland grows increasingly grim. The Ardennes offensive, what the Americans call the Battle of the Bulge, has failed. Hitler's last gamble to split the Allied forces collapsed under the weight of American industrial might. Stories circulate of Wehrmacht units retreating without fuel, of tanks abandoned when they ran dry. Meanwhile, American supply columns stretched to the horizon, their trucks and jeeps seeming as numberless as stars. In our barracks, the hierarchy has shifted dramatically. Weber and his circle of true believers have grown smaller and quieter. Their corner, once the power center where Hitler's portrait was secretly displayed on his birthday, now feels like an island of delusion amid a sea of grim acceptance. Yesterday, I overheard Weber arguing desperately with Müller, once his loyal disciple. The Führer has planned for this. It draws the enemy deep into our territory where secret weapons will destroy them. Müller simply walked away, leaving Weber shouting to empty air. The camp newspaper I edit, New Perspectives, has grown from a 4-page bulletin to a 16-page weekly. We cover camp events, share excerpts from American newspapers, carefully selected by our censors, publish poetry and short stories written by prisoners, and include German recipes adapted for American ingredients. The most popular feature is After the War, essays by prisoners imagining what life might be like in post-war Germany. The diversity of visions, from conservative monarchists dreaming of Hohenzollern restoration to democratic socialists planning worker cooperatives, reveals how completely the monolithic Nazi worldview has fractured among us. I write this entry after returning from a most unusual evening. Colonel Hayes invited several prisoner representatives to his home on the campgrounds for dinner. Myself, Dr. Kramer, Chaplain Bauer, and surprisingly, Feldwebel Schmidt, a former trade unionist from Hamburg, imprisoned before the war for social democratic activities before being conscripted and sent to Africa. Hayes's wife prepared a traditional American meal: roast turkey, sweet potatoes, green beans, and apple pie. Wine was served, the first alcohol many of us had tasted in years. The conversation remained carefully apolitical, focusing on music, literature, and life before the war. Mrs. Hayes, a former schoolteacher, spoke passable German and asked intelligent questions about Goethe and Schiller. Their daughter, a university student home on break, played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on the piano, not perfectly, but with genuine feeling. For a few hours we experienced the normalcy of civilized exchange that war had stolen from us. As we were leaving, Hayes took me aside. "Hoffman, there's something you should know. The International Red Cross has requested teachers for a POW education program. Your name has been put forward. It would mean transfer to Fort Kearny in Rhode Island. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to help shape how German prisoners might be prepared for post-war life. Yet I felt unexpected reluctance to leave Camp Shelby, which has become a kind of home, with relationships and responsibilities I've come to value. May I consider it? I asked. Hayes nodded. Take your time, but not too much. The war won't last forever, and there's work to be done preparing for what comes after. His words lingered as I walked back through the guarded gate to my barracks. The war won't last forever, a simple truth that changes everything about how one lives within it. In my footlocker, carefully preserved between pages of Goethe, I keep 2 photographs. One shows me in uniform beside my father at my commissioning, his face proud yet troubled, mine beaming with naive certainty. The other arrived 3 months ago after a year's delay, my childhood home in Frankfurt, reduced to a blackened shell after Allied bombing, my mother standing amid the ruins, her face a mask of dignified suffering. I look at them together each night. Before and after cause and effect the wages of collective madness. Tonight, I add a third item to this private shrine, a newspaper clipping Hayes gave me showing the Nuremberg rally grounds, those massive stone platforms where we once celebrated the 1,000-year Reich, now being used as a vehicle maintenance depot by American forces. Jeeps parked in neat rows where thousands once saluted in unison, the perfect symbol of monumental hubris reduced to practical utility. The America I discovered daily is not the decadent plutocracy we were taught to despise, but something more pragmatic, a nation that values function over form, results over rhetoric, innovation over tradition. Their armies advance not through fanatical courage, but through logistical brilliance, the unglamorous victory of supply chains over battle cries. I've begun to understand that what we called German idealism contained the seeds of our destruction, the romantic notion that will and spirit could triumph over material reality. We loved the image of the lone German soldier, outgunned but never outfought, holding off the materialistic hordes through sheer determination. What dangerous nonsense. I've watched American engineers construct a new barracks in 3 days, laying concrete foundations and electrical wiring with casual efficiency. The same men argue politics over dinner, criticize their generals in the open, and share their Hershey bars with German prisoners. Their system allows for both material abundance and individual freedom. The combination we were told was impossible. As I write these final lines tonight, a radio in the guards' quarters plays Glenn Miller. The smooth, sophisticated jazz, another art form prohibited as degenerate in the Reich, drifts across the compound. Several prisoners stand near the fence listening silently, perhaps wondering as I do what else we were forbidden that might have enriched rather than corrupted us. The sweet melody of Moonlight Serenade mingles with the taste memory of Coca-Cola, creating a sensory blueprint for a different kind of future, one where pleasure isn't suspect and beauty needs no ideological justification. Tomorrow I will accept Hayes's offer. The war may be ending, but the work of rebuilding not just cities but minds has only begun. My journey from Africa Corps officer to Mississippi prisoner to Rhode Island teacher marks a transformation as profound as Germany's own coming metamorphosis. The bottle cap remains in my pocket, a small token of the moment when one world ended and another became possible.